The terrifying thing about financial collapse is that the people causing it are usually the last ones to see it coming. At 7:42 p.m., Nathaniel Royce stood motionless beneath the amber glow of the restaurant's entrance chandelier while Manhattan bled rain across the windows behind him. Conversation softened the moment he walked inside. Not because anyone was told to stop talking, but because power had a soundless gravity to it. Nathaniel Royce was the founder of Royce Capital, a hedge fund empire so enormous financial networks tracked his movements the way meteorologists tracked hurricanes. A single interview from him could move billions of dollars before breakfast. Tonight, however, there was something different in his face. The confidence was still there, sharp as a tailored Tom Ford lapel, but beneath it sat exhaustion. The kind built from too many late-night calls, too many collapsing currencies, too many people pretending the world economy wasn't beginning to crack beneath polished marble floors. The restaurant was called Oraline. Old money loved Oraline because it never tried to impress anyone. No gold statues. No loud music. Just dark walnut walls, velvet booths, and quiet waiters moving through the room like ghosts carrying crystal and firelight. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood, truffle butter, and expensive red wine. Outside, Park Avenue shimmered beneath cold October rain. Inside, billionaires discussed recession forecasts over $1,200 steaks as though economic panic were another appetizer. Claire Bennett moved between tables without drawing attention to herself. That was intentional. At 27, she had perfected invisibility. Her black uniform was immaculate. Her blonde hair rested in a clean knot at the base of her neck. No jewelry except a thin silver watch with scratches along the edges. She spoke softly, walked softly, existed softly. Most customers never remembered her face 5 minutes after leaving, which was exactly how she preferred it. But Claire noticed everything. The trembling hand of a venture capitalist pretending not to panic while checking oil futures beneath the table. The pharmaceutical executive lying to his wife through a smile too practiced to be sincere. The private equity analyst in booth 9 rehearsing a resignation speech into the reflection of his wine glass. Claire saw people the way accountants saw numbers. Patterns. Weaknesses. Fear. At table 12, Nathaniel Royce removed his charcoal overcoat, while 3 younger executives instantly straightened in their chairs like nervous students awaiting judgment. One of them nearly spilled sparkling water trying to pull out his chair. Nathaniel didn't acknowledge him. The Singapore numbers came in worse than expected, one analyst said carefully as menus were distributed. Shipping exposure? Nathaniel asked without looking up. 23% above projections. Nathaniel exhaled once through his nose. Not anger. Disappointment. Somehow worse. Claire approached with a bottle of Napa Cabernet resting against her arm. Good evening, Mr. Royce, she said calmly. Would you like your usual? Nathaniel glanced at her briefly. His blue eyes were colder than the rain outside. You remember people's habits? Only the expensive ones, Claire replied softly. One of the younger executives laughed too hard at the joke. Nathaniel didn't. But for the briefest second, something almost resembling amusement flickered near the corner of his mouth before vanishing again. Claire poured the wine with steady hands while the table resumed discussing market instability. China. Shipping lanes. Currency pressure. Federal Reserve rumors. Around them, the restaurant hummed with polished anxiety disguised as wealth. Then Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine slowly beneath the chandelier light. Let me ask you something, he said suddenly. The table quieted. He looked directly at Claire now, studying her the way predators studied movement in tall grass. You spend all night listening to rich people pretend they understand the economy. One executive chuckled nervously. Nathaniel continued, his tone casual, almost playful. So tell me, Waitress, if you had my money right now, where would you put it? A few people at the table smirked immediately. Another reached for his bourbon, already expecting embarrassment to follow. Claire remained still beside the table, one hand lightly resting against the wine bottle. The rain tapped softly against the glass 30 floors below. Somewhere deeper inside the restaurant, a piano drifted through the darkness like smoke. Nathaniel Royce expected hesitation. Maybe an awkward laugh. Maybe silence. Instead, Claire tilted her head slightly and said, "Nowhere connected to maritime debt." The smile disappeared from Nathaniel's face instantly. For a moment, nobody at table 12 moved. The rain continued sliding down the tall windows overlooking Manhattan, blurring the city lights into long streaks of silver and gold, but inside Oraline the air had gone strangely still. Nathaniel Royce slowly lowered his wine glass onto the white linen tablecloth without taking his eyes off Claire. One of the younger executives gave an uncertain laugh, the kind people used when they assumed a joke had gone over their heads. "Maritime debt?" he repeated. "That is oddly specific." Claire did not answer immediately. She adjusted the wine bottle in her hand with calm precision and glanced briefly toward the enormous, abstract painting hanging behind the bar. Deep navy colors. Violent brushstrokes. It looked less like art and more like a storm trapped inside a frame. "Shipping insurance rates climbed 19% in 6 weeks," she said quietly. "Container defaults are accelerating in Southeast Asia. The banks just have not admitted how exposed they are yet." The analyst across from Nathaniel blinked twice. "How would you even know that?" Claire offered a polite smile that revealed absolutely nothing. "People talk loudly when they think service staff are invisible." Nathaniel leaned back slowly in his chair. The amusement was gone now. In its place sat calculation. He had spent 30 years building an empire by recognizing patterns before other men could see them, and something about this woman disturbed him. Not because she sounded intelligent. Plenty of intelligent people existed in New York. It was the certainty in her voice that unsettled him. She spoke the way experienced traders spoke during market panic. Calm. Precise. Already emotionally detached from the damage. One of the executives chuckled awkwardly again. "Come on. Maritime debt is not collapsing the market." Claire finally looked directly at him. "No," she said softly. "But it is where the collapse starts." Silence settled over the table once more. Somewhere near the back of the restaurant, silverware clinked against crystal. The piano player drifted into a slower melody, soft enough to sound almost accidental. Nathaniel's fingers tapped once against the stem of his wine glass. "Interesting answer," he said. "So where would you put the money?" Claire hesitated for the first time. Not from nervousness. From restraint. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. He noticed everything. "You already know the answer," she replied. "Otherwise you would not have moved 60% of Roy's capital into Treasury protection last month." One of the executives nearly choked on his bourbon. Nathaniel's expression did not change, but the temperature around the table somehow did. That information had never become public. Not yet. "Who are you?" the analyst asked before he could stop himself. Claire ignored the question entirely. She reached forward and carefully adjusted the placement of Nathaniel's wine glass by less than an inch so it rested perfectly beside the folded napkin. The movement was elegant. Controlled. "You should also reduce your shipping exposure before Friday," she continued. "Especially anything tied to Pacific Meridian Holdings." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why Friday?" Claire glanced toward the rain outside again. "Because Friday is when the panic becomes visible." A faint crease appeared near Nathaniel's jaw. For the first time that evening, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man trying to solve a dangerous equation in real time. Around them, Oraline continued glowing with old money elegance. Wealthy couples laughed softly beneath candlelight. Investors discussed mergers beside $1,200 bottles of Bordeaux. Waiters floated silently between tables carrying polished silver trays. Yet beneath the polished calm of the restaurant, tension had started moving through the room like an invisible current. Claire could feel it. Nathaniel could too. One of the younger executives attempted another laugh, weaker this time. "You sound like Bloomberg with an apron." Claire finally looked at him again, and there was something almost sad in her eyes now. Bloomberg is usually late, she said quietly. Nathaniel stared at her for several long seconds. Then very slowly, he pushed his untouched steak knife aside and folded his hands together on the table. Sit down for a minute, Miss Bennet, he said. I think this conversation just became expensive. The analyst beside Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Claire remained standing beneath the soft amber light hanging above table 12. Around them, Oraline continued performing its nightly theater of polished wealth and controlled conversation, but something had changed at the center of the room. Curiosity had weight. It moved through people before words did. Nearby diners had started glancing toward Nathaniel's table without fully understanding why. Wealth recognized tension instinctively. Claire placed the wine bottle gently onto a silver tray and folded her hands in front of her apron. I am still working, she said calmly. Nathaniel studied her for another long moment before nodding once toward the empty chair across from him. Then humor me for 60 seconds. One of the younger executives looked horrified. Another looked fascinated. No waitress sat with clients at Oraline. The restaurant had rules older than some governments. But Nathaniel Royce had spent most of his adult life treating rules like temporary inconveniences. Claire hesitated only briefly before taking the seat. Her movements remained composed, elegant without trying to be. The piano melody drifted lower through the restaurant, while rain slid slowly down the massive windows overlooking the city skyline. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. Pacific Meridian, he said. Why specifically them? Claire looked toward the candle flickering between them. Because they are lying. One executive frowned immediately. Public earnings were strong last quarter. Exactly, Claire replied. Too strong. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. Explain. Claire rested her hands lightly against the edge of the tablecloth. 3 months ago, Pacific Meridian quietly extended payment terms to multiple shipping contractors from 45 days to 120. One analyst blinked. That information was never released. No, Claire said softly. But their suppliers started missing payroll 2 weeks later. Nathaniel's expression remained unreadable, but internally something cold moved through him. He had spent decades around market experts, economists, analysts from Ivy League schools, and billion-dollar strategists. Most people talked about finance like mathematics. This woman talked about it like weather. She saw movement before impact. You are making assumptions from indirect indicators, one executive said carefully, trying to regain control of the conversation. Claire shook her head once. No. I am following stress fractures. Silence returned again. Nathaniel folded his hands beneath his chin. You talk like someone who worked in the industry. Claire offered the faintest smile. A long time ago. Where? She looked directly at him now. Calm. Steady. Places people stop sleeping. One of the executives laughed nervously, but Nathaniel did not. He recognized the answer immediately. Hedge funds. High-frequency trading firms. Institutional forecasting. The environments where ambition burned through human beings faster than caffeine ever could. Nathaniel glanced down briefly at the silver watch resting on Claire's wrist. Old. Scratched. Expensive once, but worn for years. Not the kind of watch a waitress usually owned. You still have not answered my question, he said quietly. Who are you? Claire's eyes shifted toward the rain beyond the glass. Someone who learned very early that numbers are never emotional. And people are? Nathaniel asked. Claire looked back at him. People panic. Numbers just tell the truth. The analyst nearest Nathaniel swallowed hard and checked his phone beneath the table. His face lost color almost immediately. Nathaniel noticed. What? The analyst hesitated. Shipping index futures just dropped another 4%. The table went silent again. Outside, thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the Manhattan skyline. Nathaniel's attention slowly returned to Claire. That timing feels almost supernatural, he said. Claire stood from the table smoothly before anyone could stop her. No, she replied softly. Just predictable. She reached for the silver tray again with practiced grace. Invisible once more. But before she could step away, Nathaniel spoke again, his voice quieter now than it had been all evening. Miss Bennet. Claire paused. Yes? Nathaniel looked at her carefully, as though trying to remember a face from years ago. Have we met before? For the first time since the conversation began, something unreadable flickered behind Claire's calm expression. Not fear. Not surprise. Recognition. Claire's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the silver tray as Nathaniel Royce continued watching her from across the candlelit table. The restaurant noise seemed farther away now, softened beneath rain and piano notes, and the low hum of Manhattan somewhere beyond the glass. Recognition lingered between them like smoke. Claire recovered first. I do not think so, Mr. Royce, she said calmly. Then she turned to leave. Wait. Nathaniel's voice was quiet, but people like him never needed volume to command attention. Claire stopped beside the table without looking back. Nathaniel studied her profile carefully. The posture. The restraint. The way she answered questions by revealing almost nothing. His memory moved through years of conferences, market briefings, private investor summits, searching for something just beyond reach. Then suddenly one of the younger executives snapped his fingers softly. CB. The others looked toward him. The analyst stared directly at Claire now, eyes widening slowly. No way. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened immediately. What? The analyst swallowed hard. 5 years ago there was an anonymous macro paper circulating through every major fund on Wall Street. Claire closed her eyes briefly, almost tired. The analyst continued anyway. The ghost forecast. One executive frowned. The recession paper? Not just recession, the analyst said quietly. It predicted the European bond collapse almost 8 months early. Currency instability. Shipping contagion. Liquidity panic. Everything. Nathaniel's expression changed for the first time that evening. Not shock. Recognition. He remembered the paper now. Every serious investor did. The analysis had been terrifyingly accurate and written with surgical precision by someone known only as C.B. Entire firms had spent months trying to uncover the identity behind it. Nobody ever succeeded. You wrote it, Nathaniel said softly. Claire finally turned toward him again. Her face remained calm, but there was a heaviness in her eyes now that had not been there before. A long time ago. One executive laughed under his breath in disbelief. You are telling me the woman carrying wine trays wrote the most infamous market paper of the decade? Claire looked at him without offense. People carry heavier things than trays. Silence settled again. Nathaniel leaned back slowly in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made the younger men at the table uncomfortable. Why disappear? He asked. Claire did not answer immediately. The piano player shifted into a slower song near the far end of the restaurant. Rainwater rolled down the enormous windows overlooking Park Avenue, while headlights shimmered below like rivers of moving gold. Because people on Wall Street mistake prediction for power, Claire said quietly. And eventually they start believing they are smarter than consequences. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. That sounds personal. Claire's eyes drifted briefly toward the city outside. It was. One of the executives checked his phone again and suddenly sat upright. Nathaniel. The billionaire did not look away from Claire. What? Pacific Meridian just suspended overnight lending. The entire table froze. Nathaniel slowly reached for the phone being handed toward him. His expression remained controlled as he scanned the screen, but the atmosphere around him shifted instantly. The kind of shift that happened when billion-dollar instincts confirmed danger before public panic arrived. Claire watched quietly. No satisfaction. No triumph. Only certainty. Nathaniel lowered the phone carefully onto the tablecloth. That announcement was not scheduled until tomorrow morning. Claire nodded once. Now you understand the timing problem. One executive whispered something under his breath that sounded almost like prayer. Nathaniel ignored him completely. His attention remained fixed on Claire. You knew before the market did. The market always knows, Claire replied softly. It just lies to itself for as long as possible. The rain intensified against the windows. Somewhere deeper inside Oraline, a champagne cork popped and distant laughter followed, absurdly disconnected from the tension now sitting at table 12. Nathaniel folded his hands together slowly. You could make $10 million a year walking back into finance tomorrow. Claire gave a faint smile touched with sadness. That is exactly why I never will. For the first time in many years, Nathaniel Royce had no immediate response. Because beneath the polished calm of the restaurant and the billion-dollar conversations and the expensive wine, he suddenly realized something deeply unsettling. Claire Bennett was not impressed by wealth. Which meant she could see things everyone else in his world had trained themselves to ignore. The tension at table 12 spread slowly through Oraline like perfume through warm air. Nobody announced it. Nobody needed to. Wealthy people had spent entire lifetimes learning how to sense danger before it became public. Conversations nearby had grown quieter. Phones appeared beneath tables. Eyes drifted toward financial headlines glowing faintly against polished screens. Outside, the October rain painted Manhattan in liquid silver while traffic crawled below the skyscrapers like rivers of red and white light. Claire stood beside the table holding the silver tray against her side with effortless composure, but Nathaniel Royce could no longer see her as part of the restaurant. The illusion was gone now. She was not staff. She was not background. She was something far more dangerous in his world. Someone who understood it completely and chose not to belong to it anymore. Nathaniel glanced again at the phone resting beside his wine glass. Pacific Meridian's emergency lending suspension was already triggering speculation across after-hours trading channels. He knew what would happen next. Fear would spread quietly first. Then publicly. Then violently through markets pretending stability still existed. One of the younger executives cleared his throat carefully. Nathaniel, we should probably head back to the office. Nathaniel ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Claire. You saw this coming weeks ago, did not you? Claire gave a small shrug. The signs were obvious. The analyst beside him shook his head immediately. No, they were not. Claire looked at him gently, almost sympathetically. People only call something obvious after they survive it. Silence followed. Nathaniel slowly leaned back in his chair. Candlelight flickered across the sharp lines of his face while the piano drifted through the restaurant in soft, melancholy waves. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Claire answered without hesitation. Tomorrow morning everyone will pretend this is isolated. By Monday they will start using words like correction and temporary instability. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the rain outside. By next month they will start blaming each other. One executive laughed nervously again, but it sounded weaker now. You make it sound inevitable. Claire looked directly at him. Debt always is. Nathaniel studied her carefully. The calmness unsettled him more than panic would have. Most people around money became louder when discussing collapse. More emotional. More desperate. Claire spoke about billion-dollar consequences the way doctors discussed weather patterns before a storm. Detached. Precise. Already emotionally prepared for impact. You still analyze markets every day, Nathaniel said suddenly. Claire tilted her head slightly. Habits survive longer than careers. Nathaniel glanced down at the scratched silver watch on her wrist again. Then something clicked in his memory. Not from finance. From years ago. A conference in Boston. A private economics summit attended by hedge fund founders, policy advisors, and institutional investors. He remembered a young woman in the back row challenging a Federal Reserve consultant during a closed discussion on leverage exposure. Calm voice. Sharp analysis. Entire room stunned into silence. Heartbreak Summit, Nathaniel said quietly. Claire's expression changed almost invisibly. That was you. Claire did not answer immediately, and in her silence Nathaniel found confirmation. You embarrassed a Treasury advisor in front of 200 investors, he continued. You could not have been older than 22. Claire looked down briefly at the candle flickering between them. He was wrong. One of the executives stared at her in disbelief. You spoke at Harbridge? Claire gave a faint smile touched with exhaustion. For 11 minutes. Nathaniel almost laughed then, not from amusement, but from the absurdity of it. For years Wall Street had treated the mysterious author of the ghost forecasts like mythology. Some assumed the writer was a hidden team of economists. Others thought it was a retired institutional strategist hiding behind anonymity. Meanwhile, the woman who wrote it had been quietly refilling water glasses beneath chandeliers while billionaires discussed markets around her. Nathaniel looked toward the enormous windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain slid slowly across the glass while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Then he asked the question that had started forming the moment recognition settled into place. What happened to you, Claire? For the first time all evening, her composure cracked slightly. Not visibly enough for anyone else to notice. But Nathaniel did. Because suddenly her eyes no longer looked like someone predicting collapse. They looked like someone remembering one. For several seconds, Claire said nothing. The restaurant lights reflected softly across the rain-streaked windows behind her while the distant piano continued threading through Oraline like a memory nobody could quite hold on to. Nathaniel Royce remained perfectly still across the table, waiting. Most people filled silence because it frightened them. Claire never did. She understood silence had weight. It forced truth to surface eventually. One of the younger executives shifted awkwardly and reached for his drink, but Nathaniel raised a hand slightly without even looking at him. The message was clear. Do not interrupt. Claire lowered her eyes briefly toward the candle flickering between the wine glasses. My father believed numbers could save people, she said quietly. Nathaniel's expression softened almost imperceptibly. It was the first personal thing she had revealed all evening. Was he in finance too? Claire nodded once. Municipal risk analysis. Chicago. Her voice remained calm, but something deeper moved beneath it now. Old exhaustion. He spent 23 years warning city pension boards about leverage exposure and synthetic debt structures nobody understood. One executive frowned. Most cities ignored those warnings. Claire looked at him gently. Yes. Rain tapped softly against the enormous windows while headlights blurred far below on Park Avenue. Then one year, Claire continued, the people who ignored him needed someone to blame. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. He already understood where the story was going. Finance had always protected power first and honesty second. Claire's fingers rested lightly against the silver tray in her hands. My father testified publicly against a development group hiding debt inside pension reallocations. She paused briefly. The firms involved were politically connected. Very wealthy. Very protected. The analyst beside Nathaniel swallowed hard. He had heard versions of this story before. They always ended the same way. The market collapsed 6 months later, Claire said softly. Retirement funds disappeared. Entire neighborhoods lost everything they had spent decades building. Her eyes drifted toward the city skyline glowing through rain. And somehow the only person people remembered was the man who warned them. Silence settled heavily across the table. Nathaniel folded his hands slowly beneath his chin. Your father became the scapegoat. Claire nodded once. Reporters camped outside our house for 3 weeks. Politicians denied knowing him. Investors called him incompetent because admitting the truth would have implicated themselves. One executive stared down at his untouched steak, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. Claire continued speaking in the same calm voice she had used all evening, but somehow that made the story heavier instead of lighter. One morning he stopped answering phone calls. The piano melody shifted softly in the distance. 3 days later, I found his office empty except for a yellow legal pad covered in numbers. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Claire finally looked directly at him again. The final line he wrote said they knew. They always knew. Nobody at the table spoke. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Manhattan while rainwater slid slowly across the glass like tears nobody acknowledged in public. Claire exhaled quietly. After that, Wall Street felt different to me. Nathaniel watched her carefully. Because you blamed them? Claire shook her head. No. Her eyes were steady now. Clear. Because I realized intelligence means nothing in rooms where profit is more important than truth. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Nathaniel leaned back slowly in his chair. For years he had survived by believing intelligence and discipline separated men like him from collapse. But Claire spoke as someone who had already watched intelligence fail against greed. So you disappeared, Nathaniel said quietly. I walked away, Claire corrected softly. There is a difference. One of the executives finally spoke again, his voice subdued now. And now you work here? Claire glanced around Oraline. The chandeliers. The polished silverware. The billionaires pretending markets were stable over $1,000 dinners. This place reminds me that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe someone beneath them is listening. Nathaniel almost smiled at that, though there was no humor in it. Because suddenly he understood something unsettling about Claire Bennett. She had not left finance because she was broken by it. She had left because she saw through it too clearly to remain inside it any longer. Then Nathaniel's phone vibrated once against the tablecloth. He glanced down at the screen. His expression hardened instantly. Another shipping fund had frozen withdrawals. Nathaniel Royce stared at the notification glowing against his phone screen while the candlelight flickered across the sharp angles of his face. Another shipping fund freezing withdrawals should not have surprised him. Not tonight. Not after everything Claire Bennett had already predicted with terrifying precision. Yet the timing still unsettled him. Because timing was where fortunes lived or died. Around table 12, the atmosphere inside Oraline had shifted completely now. Nearby conversations were becoming fragmented. Distracted. Phones remained visible beneath white linen tablecloths longer than etiquette normally allowed. Investors were quietly checking futures. Executives were pretending not to panic. The wealthy were experts at disguising fear as inconvenience. Claire stood calmly beside the table once more, her silver tray balanced lightly against one hip as though none of this had anything to do with her. Nathaniel found that almost impossible to believe now. How bad does it get? He asked quietly. Claire looked at him for several seconds before answering. That depends on how long powerful people keep pretending this is temporary. One of the younger executives rubbed his forehead anxiously. The Federal Reserve will intervene before contagion spreads. Claire's expression remained gentle. Intervention works when trust still exists. Nobody responded to that. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. The city looked beautiful from 30 floors above the street. Distant headlights shimmered like moving rivers beneath the storm while skyscrapers disappeared into low clouds and fog. New York always looked invincible at night. That was part of its illusion. You still think like an analyst, Nathaniel said softly. Claire shook her head once. No. Analysts still believe they can control outcomes. The piano player near the bar shifted into a slower jazz standard while waiters continued moving silently through the restaurant carrying wine bottles worth more than most monthly mortgages. Somewhere nearby, a wealthy couple laughed too loudly at something neither of them found funny. Nathaniel suddenly realized how strange this entire evening felt. He had entered Oraline expecting another routine dinner surrounded by people desperate to impress him. Instead, he found himself listening to a former financial prodigy explain collapse with the calm certainty of someone reading weather reports. You know what bothers me most? Nathaniel asked quietly. Claire tilted her head slightly. You are not surprised by any of this. Claire looked down briefly at the candle burning between them. Markets collapsed slowly first, she said softly. Then all at once. Nathaniel recognized the truth in that immediately. He had built Royce Capital by understanding timing, pressure, and fear better than most men around him. But tonight felt different. Tonight he felt behind something instead of ahead of it. One executive suddenly looked up from his phone, pale. Nathaniel. What now? Sterling Atlantic just halted bond trading. Silence crashed across the table. Sterling Atlantic was not small. It was one of the largest institutional lenders connected to international shipping exposure. Nathaniel slowly closed his eyes for half a second. That was not instability anymore. That was fracture. Claire remained perfectly still. The dominoes were already falling, she said quietly. People are only noticing them now because the sound is getting louder. Nathaniel opened his eyes again and studied her carefully. How did you know before everyone else? Claire gave the faintest smile. Sad. Tired. Because panic always leaves footprints before it arrives. One executive let out a nervous breath. This is insane. Claire looked toward him gently. No. This is leverage. Nathaniel almost laughed at that, though there was nothing amusing left in the room. He realized then that Claire Bennett possessed something far more dangerous than intelligence. She possessed perspective untouched by greed. Most people in finance saw markets through ambition. Claire saw them through consequence. The difference was enormous. Nathaniel reached for his wine glass but stopped halfway. If you knew this was coming, he asked quietly, why stay here? Claire looked around Oraline again. The chandeliers. The polished silver. The billionaires pretending composure over $1,000 bottles of wine. Because this place teaches me something every night, she said softly. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. What? Claire finally met his gaze fully again. The people closest to collapse are usually the ones most convinced they are untouchable. The words settled heavily between them. Then suddenly Nathaniel's phone rang. Not a text. Not an alert. An actual call. The screen displayed the name of his chief risk officer. At nearly 8:30 at night. Nathaniel answered immediately. He listened for only 5 seconds before the color drained slowly from his face. Even Claire noticed it. Nathaniel lowered the phone carefully onto the tablecloth. Then, for the first time all evening, the billionaire who moved global markets looked genuinely shaken. Royce Capital just lost $800 million in after-hours exposure, he said quietly. For several long seconds, nobody at table 12 spoke. The number itself hung in the air heavier than the rain clouds outside Manhattan. $800 million. Lost in after-hours exposure before the market had even officially opened the next day. One of the younger executives visibly paled while another reached for his phone with trembling fingers, already preparing for calls he did not want to make. Nathaniel Royce remained completely still beneath the warm chandelier light, but Claire Bennett noticed the subtle change immediately. His posture had shifted. Not physically. Internally. The confidence was still there, but now it carried something unfamiliar beside it. Uncertainty. The piano near the bar continued drifting softly through Oraline while wealthy diners around the restaurant pretended not to notice the growing tension radiating from the billionaire's table. Crystal glasses clinked. Waiters moved silently between velvet booths. Outside, rainwater rolled down the windows overlooking Park Avenue like liquid mercury. The city still looked beautiful. Markets always did before panic became public. Nathaniel slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose once. The movement felt strangely human. Smaller somehow than the man who had walked into Oraline an hour earlier believing he controlled outcomes through sheer force of intelligence. How exposed are we? One executive asked quietly. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained lowered toward the tablecloth while calculations moved behind them faster than anyone else in the room could follow. Too exposed, he finally said. Silence returned again. Claire stood beside the table calmly, neither triumphant nor sympathetic. Only observant. Nathaniel looked up at her after a moment. You already knew this would happen tonight. Claire tilted her head slightly. Not the exact number. Close enough. Claire said nothing. Nathaniel gave a faint humorless laugh beneath his breath. Do you know what is strange? He asked quietly. Most people spend their entire lives trying to get closer to men like me. His blue eyes lifted toward her again. You spent yours walking away. Claire glanced briefly toward the rain outside. Because proximity to power changes people. And it did not change you? Nathaniel asked. Claire's expression softened faintly, touched with old exhaustion. It did. Her answer surprised him more than denial would have. One executive suddenly interrupted, voice tight with anxiety. Nathaniel, we need to leave now. Asian markets open in less than 3 hours. Nathaniel ignored him completely. Tell me something honestly, Claire. She looked at him quietly. Did you ever regret leaving finance? The candlelight flickered between them while thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond the skyline. Claire considered the question carefully before answering. I regretted believing intelligence automatically made people ethical. Nathaniel looked down briefly at his untouched wine glass. That answer landed harder than she realized. Because for most of his life, he had measured worth through competence, discipline, strategy, winning. Yet tonight a waitress who no longer trusted the financial world understood it more clearly than the executives still trapped inside it. One of the analysts refreshed market futures again, and quietly muttered a curse beneath his breath. Another 6% drop. The younger executive looked genuinely panicked now. This is spreading too fast. Claire shook her head softly. No. The truth is simply moving faster than denial. Nathaniel stared at her across the candlelight for several long seconds. Then suddenly he asked, Why did you really stay hidden all these years? Claire looked at him with an unreadable expression. Because once people decide you can predict disaster, they stop treating you like a person. The restaurant around them seemed strangely distant now, as though Table 12 existed inside its own quiet storm. Nathaniel understood exactly what she meant. Markets worshipped prediction only until prediction became inconvenient. Then they destroyed whoever delivered it. His phone vibrated again against the tablecloth. This time he did not reach for it immediately. He already knew it would be bad news. Instead, he looked toward the rain-covered skyline beyond the glass and asked the question softly, almost to himself. How many people saw this coming and stayed quiet because nobody powerful wanted to hear it? Claire's eyes lowered briefly. More than you think. Nathaniel finally picked up the phone and scanned the newest alert. His expression darkened instantly. One of the executives leaned forward anxiously. What is it? Nathaniel lowered the phone slowly back onto the table. Then he looked directly at Claire Bennett with something that almost resembled respect. The Federal Reserve just scheduled an emergency meeting for 6 a.m., he said quietly. And somehow you knew before they did. The rain had not stopped by the time the clock above Oraline's private wine display reached 9:14 p.m. Manhattan still shimmered beneath storm clouds and reflected headlights, beautiful in the way fragile things often were before they broke. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The wealthy diners still occupied their velvet booths beneath warm chandeliers, but the illusion of calm was gone now. Phones remained openly visible. Conversations had lowered into urgent whispers. A hedge fund manager near the bar abruptly stood and walked outside mid-meal without finishing his wine. Another table requested the check 3 separate times within 10 minutes. Fear was spreading through the room faster than market data ever could. Nathaniel Royce sat motionless at table 12, staring at the latest alerts flooding across his phone screen while his executives exchanged quiet, panicked conversations beside him. Emergency Federal Reserve meeting. Bond volatility spike. Shipping index collapse. Liquidity concerns. The language of financial crisis had officially begun. Yet somehow the strangest part of the evening remained the woman standing calmly beside the candlelight holding a silver tray against her side like none of this surprised her anymore. Claire Bennett looked less like someone witnessing disaster and more like someone watching gravity complete its work. Nathaniel finally set his phone down again and looked at her carefully. You knew, he said quietly. Claire did not pretend otherwise. I suspected. Nathaniel let out a slow breath through his nose and glanced toward the rain-covered skyline beyond the windows. Do you know what I spent 30 years believing? Claire waited silently. That if I worked harder than everyone else, he said softly, I could stay ahead of collapse. The honesty in his voice surprised even him. One of the younger executives looked down immediately, suddenly uncomfortable hearing vulnerability from a man who had built his reputation on absolute control. Claire's expression softened slightly. Hard work delays consequences sometimes, she replied quietly. It does not erase them. Nathaniel almost smiled at that. Not because it was comforting. Because it was true. Around them, Oraline continued glowing with polished elegance while the financial world outside began quietly fracturing by the minute. The contrast felt surreal now. A billionaire losing nearly $1 billion beneath crystal chandeliers while jazz drifted softly through candlelight. Claire adjusted the silver tray gently against her side. You should go, she said. Nathaniel looked up at her. And do what? Protect the people who trusted you. The words landed harder than any market loss that evening. Nathaniel stared at her for several long seconds before standing slowly from the table. The executives immediately rose with him, anxious and disoriented like men waking inside a storm. Yet Nathaniel did not move toward the exit immediately. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his charcoal jacket and removed a black business card trimmed in silver. Royce Capital. His direct number embossed beneath his name. He placed it carefully onto the table beside the candle. If you ever decide to come back, he said quietly, there is a place waiting for you. Claire looked at the card but did not touch it. That is kind of you. Nathaniel studied her face carefully. But? Claire's eyes drifted toward the windows where rain slid slowly across the glass overlooking Manhattan. Some places are too expensive, she said softly. Nathaniel understood immediately she was not talking about money. The piano player near the bar transitioned into the final song of the evening, while waiters quietly reset abandoned tables throughout the restaurant. Somewhere beyond the windows, sirens echoed faintly through the wet city streets below. Nathaniel slipped his coat back on slowly. For the first time in years, he felt smaller than the empire built around his name. Not weak. Just human. Before turning toward the exit, he looked back at Claire one final time. You know, he said quietly, when I walked in tonight, I thought I was testing a waitress. Claire finally picked up the black business card and turned it once between her fingers beneath the candlelight. And now? Nathaniel glanced toward the storm outside. Now I think the universe sent me a warning wearing an apron. For the first time all evening, Claire smiled fully. Small. Genuine. Almost sad. Then Nathaniel Royce walked out into the rain-soaked Manhattan night surrounded by executives and collapsing market alerts, and the unbearable weight of responsibility. Claire remained standing beside table 12 long after he disappeared beyond the glass doors. Finally she looked down at the receipt resting beneath the candle and quietly wrote 5 words across the bottom before leaving the empty table behind. Wealth survives. Ego never does.